board will now come to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Tyus, Alderwoman Flowers, Alderman Bosley, Alderman Moore, Alderwoman Hubbard, Alderwoman Ingracia, Alderman Coder, Alderman Conway, Alderman Ortman, Alderman Vollmer, Alderman Villa, Alderman Arnowitz, Alderwoman Murphy, Alderwoman Howard, Alderwoman Green, Alderwoman Behringer, Alderman Rhodey, Alderman Kennedy, Alderwoman Davis, Alderwoman Spencer, Alderman French, Alderman Boyd, Alderman Vaccaro, Alderman Ogilvie, Alderman Cone, Alderman Williamson, Alderman Carter, Alderwoman Cruzen, President Reed,
Here.
Alderwoman Tyus, Alderwoman Flowers, Alderman Conway, Alderman Rhodey, Alderman Kennedy, Alderwoman Davis, Alderman French, Alderwoman Cruzen, 23 present.
Quorum being present, now let's everyone in chambers and galleries who's able to stand, please rise for prayer. Giving all honor to God, Almighty God, source of all authority, we humbly ask guidance in our deliberations and wisdom in our conclusions. Amen. Introduction of honored guests. Any introduction of honored guests? Alderman from 26.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. I'd like to announce as my special guest today, resident 26th Ward and former comptroller of the city of St. Louis, Mr. Vervis Jones. Thank you.
Alderman from 7th.
Good morning, Mr. President, members of the board. I'm honored to have as my special guest from the Carpenters District Council, Keith Taylor.
Alderman from 24th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to welcome Paige Selby from Ameren UE to City Hall today.
Alderman from the 12th.
Good morning, Mr. President, members of the board. I'd like to introduce as my special guest to my right here, Ken Griffey, a former city employee with the Sheriff's Office who lives in my ward. Also Brian Sullivan from the Board of Elections and Jeffrey Hans from the Carpenters Union.
All right, welcome. Alderman from the 16th.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the board. I would like to have as my special guest today Gina Hackenwork with Ameren and my constituent Steve Spreck with Communication Workers.
Alderman from the 14th.
Good morning, Mr. President. I'd like to have as my special guest Gary Otten from the Painters Union and Jim Sonderman from the Water Department.
Alderman from 27th.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. I'd like to have as my special guest Leonard Johnson from the Treasurer's Office and Angela Drake. Thanks.
Any further introductions? Any further introductions? Alderman from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the board. I'd like to have as my special guest the licensed collector, Ms. Mavis Thompson. And Percy Green.
And Percy Green. Any further introductions? Alderman from the 22nd.
The members of the board, I'd like to have Ms. Gina Hackenworth with Ameren UE, Missouri as my special guest.
Any further introductions? Any further introductions? Alderman from the 10th, like to wrap us up?
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. As we're gathered here on the 15th of May, which in some circles is known as National Bike to Work Day or Scott Ogilvie Day.
Yeah.
It was on this day in 1817 that in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the first mental hospital ever in America opened. And the original name was called the Asylum for Relief of Persons Deprived of Their Use of Reason. They later shortened it to the House of Vaccaro.
Alderman from the 18th, you recognize on approval of the minutes. Alderman from the 18th, you recognize on approval of the minutes.
Yes, Mr. President, members of the board, I move for the adoption of the minutes of May 1st, 2015.
Moved by the Alderman from the 18th, seconded by the Alderman from the 25th. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Report of city officials.
Report of city officials can be found in sections A, B, and C of the agenda and have been placed in all aldermen's mailboxes.
Dispense with line items 7 through 10, first reading board bills.
Board Bill 55, sponsored by Alderwoman Cruzen, an ordinance recommended by the Airport Commission and the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, authorizing and directing the Director of Airports and the Comptroller to enter into and execute a lease agreement for Northern Track, substantially in the form as set out in Attachment 1 to this ordinance between the city owner and operator of Lambert Airport and by National Gateway Terminal LLC, a Missouri limited liability company, granting to the lessee the right to occupy and use the leased premises and containing a severability clause and an emergency clause. Board Bill 56, sponsored by Alderman Vaccaro, an ordinance establishing a stop sign for all northbound and southbound traffic traveling on Wabash at Lindenwood Place and containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 57, sponsored by Alderwoman Hubbard, an ordinance recommended by the Planning Commission to change the zoning of property as indicated on the district map from D, multiple family dwelling district, to F, neighborhood commercial district for properties on North 13th Street and containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 58, sponsored by Alderwoman Hubbard, an ordinance recommended by the Planning Commission to change the zoning of property from C, multiple family dwelling district, to the J, industrial district for properties on Glasgow Avenue and containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 59, sponsored by Alderman Rhodey, an ordinance recommended by the Planning Commission to change the zoning of property from J, industrial district, to the H, area commercial district for properties on Hickory Street and Ruckert Street and containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 60, sponsored by Alderman Vaccaro, an ordinance submitting to the qualified voters a proposed amendment to the revised code repealing existing section 8.02.170 of the revised code relating to penalty for delinquent filing and containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 61, sponsored by Alderman Vaccaro, an ordinance submitting to the qualified voters of the city a proposed amendment to the revised code by repealing existing section 8.02.120 of the revised code and enacting a new section relating to the penalty for delinquent filing and containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 62, sponsored by Alderman Vaccaro, an ordinance submitting to the qualified voters of the city a proposed amendment to the revised code by repealing existing section 8.06.090 of the revised code and enacting a new section relating to the penalty for delinquent filing and containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 63, sponsored by Alderman Vaccaro, an ordinance submitting to the qualified voters a proposed amendment to the revised code by repealing existing section 8.06.080 of the revised code and enacting a new section relating to fees, payment, and delay and containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 64, sponsored by Alderman Bosley, an ordinance to repeal ordinance 68706 relating to the appointment and rates of compensation of certain employees of the license collector and containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 65, sponsored by Alderman Ortman, an ordinance pertaining to parking within the 2200 Cherokee Street residential parking district, authorizing the traffic administrator to designate the location and restrictions for curb parking of residential parking zones within the north side of the 2200 Cherokee Street residential parking district, containing definitions, a penalty clause, and an emergency clause. That's the extent of our first reading.
Reference to committee.
To the Transportation and Commerce Committee, Board Bill 55. To the Public Employees Committee, Board Bill 64. To the Streets Committee, Board Bills 56 and 65. to the Housing Committee, Board Bills 57, 58, and 59, and to the Ways and Means Committee, Board Bills 60, 61, 62, and 63. That's the extent of reference to committee.
Second reading.
The following board bill was reported out of the Ways and Means Committee, Board Bill 2, Committee Substitute, sponsored by President Reed, an ordinance providing for and directing the submission to qualified electors at a special bond election to be held on the 4th day of August 2015 of proposals for incurring indebtedness and issuing general obligations bond in the evidence thereof in the aggregate amount not to exceed $180 million upon the assent to the said proposals, respectively, of 2/3 of the qualified electors voting thereon and containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 4, sponsored by Alderwoman Flowers, an ordinance authorizing the sale to the Procter & Gamble Manufacturing Company of certain real estate owned by the city, approving a contract to purchase real estate, approving an agreement of lease, authorizing certain actions by city officials, containing a severability clause and containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 36, sponsored by Alderman Conway and President Reed, an ordinance to provide for the borrowing of funds in anticipation of the collection of tax payments levied by the city for deposit in its general revenue fund for the calendar year ending December the 31st, 2015, and remaining uncollected, and other revenues remaining to be collected and deposited in the general revenue fund for fiscal year ending June the 30th, 2016, and containing an emergency clause. That's the extent of our second reading.
We'll dispense with line item 19 through 14. I move for adoption of our courtesy resolution. Can I entertain a second on that motion? Seconded by the Alderman from the 25th. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We dispense with line items 21 and 22, miscellaneous unfinished business.
We have none.
Announcements.
Tuesday, Ways and Means Committee meeting, 8:30 a.m. in the Leisure Room. Also on Tuesday, Transportation and Commerce meeting, 11:30 a.m. in the Leisure Room. Wednesday, Ways and Means Committee meeting, 8:30 a.m. in the Leisure Room. Thursday, full board meeting, 10 a.m. in the Chambers. No meetings on Friday. That's the extent of my announcement.
Alderman from the 9th.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. First of all, I'd like to have for my honored guest, Maureen McDonald from St. Louis Association of Realtors.
Welcome, Maureen.
Before we end, and then my announcement, tomorrow on Cherokee Antique Row side, they're having their annual history fair, and it's from 11 to 4 o'clock. They're having a scavenger hunt, vintage bikes and cars, live music, and free prizes. But you got to work to get them. So if you're not doing anything, stop by during that time on Antique Row. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Alderwoman from the 14th.
Good morning, Mr. President. I'd like to remind Bevonians that tomorrow is the opening of the Bevo police substation at 5039 Gravois. The Bosnian Chamber of Commerce has partnered with the community to open this substation, and it's fully stocked and ready to go. Thank you so much. Oh, that'll be 10 a.m. tomorrow, Saturday.
Okay. Alderman from the 3rd.
Mr. President, members of the board, we'll have a streets meeting this coming Thursday at 10 a.m. in the Leisure Room. And anybody who has a bill in streets that would like to have it heard, tell the clerk.
We're going to have a board meeting that Thursday because
this
of that.
Thursday?
Yeah.
At 10?
Yes. But you can work it out with the...
We're doing a week from Thursday.
A week from Thursday. So a week from Thursday. Madam Clerk, make note of that. Thanks, Alderman.
So noted.
Alderwoman from the 15th.
President, members of the board, this Thursday at 6:30 p.m. at the Carpenter Branch Library, there will be a public input session for the 2015-2016 budget, and that is hosted by Alderman Conway. So it's in the 15th Ward, but hosted by Conway, so please come out.
All right, thank you. Alderwoman from the 19th.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. I'd like to have on the calendar a rules and engrossment meeting for Wednesday, the 27th at 10:30.
Okay. All right. Any further announcements? Alderman from the 8th.
Mr. President, members of the board, we will be starting our Ways and Means Committee meetings on the budget starting on Tuesday of this week. It'll be Tuesday, Wednesday, and on the 21st of May, we will have an evening meeting on the budget.
All right, thank you. Any further announcements? Any further announcements? Alderman from the 18th, you recognize on the motion to excuse.
Yes, Mr. President, members of the board, I move that the alderman from the 1st, 2nd, and 28th be excused for necessary absence.
Moved by the alderman from the 18th, entertain a second on that motion. Seconded by the alderman from the 26th. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Alderman from the 18th, you recognize on the motion to adjourn.
Yes, Mr. President, members of the board, I move that the board adjourns until Thursday, May 21st, 2015, 10 a.m.
Moved by the alderman from the 18th, seconded by the alderman from the 11th. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Stand adjourned.